At 69, I found my wife and son's secret will hidden between medical bills on our kitchen table. My hands froze when I read the line. He receives nothing. That night, my son stood at the head of the table and said, "Dad, don't worry. We'll take care of the house when you can't anymore." My wife wore a smile that looked like kindness, but there was something they'd missed, something I caught before that document went back in its envelope. The two of them had made an assumption. The deed carried more weight than either one had reckoned with. Welcome back to His Hidden Revenge. If you're new here, I'm glad you found your way to this story. These are the kinds of tales that stay with you, and if this one speaks to something you've been carrying, I hope you'll consider subscribing and leaving a like. It means more than you know. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, are you listening this morning, this afternoon, or late at night, when the house finally goes quiet? I always wonder who's on the other end of this. One more thing, some elements of this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. At 69 years old, sitting in the cold November dawn, with my 96th mortgage payment receipt in hand, I understood that the people who call you family are sometimes the ones who know you least. The bank statement lay on the kitchen table, next to my black coffee still steaming in the pre-dawn chill that crept through the old farmhouse windows. $140, auto-pay like clockwork for 8 straight years. 96 consecutive months of money, leaving an account my wife and son had never thought to ask about. I took a sip bitter, the way I'd learned to prefer it during 34 years, running Crofton Auto Repair, before I sold the shop and walked away with more money than anyone under this roof ever knew I had. The warmth settled going down. Outside the kitchen window in early November, frost caught the light across the 3-acre Zanesville, Ohio homestead that everyone assumed belonged to my son. My 2005 Chevy Silverado sat in the gravel drive paid for in cash 11 years ago, with a single check that barely registered against the nest egg I'd accumulated turning wrenches and pulling transmissions. The truck had age on it now, but it ran right. I'd seen to that personally. 96 times, 8 years of auto pay, and not once had anyone in this house thought to ask what it was costing me. I heard the bedroom floor creak upstairs. Dottie, my wife, of 42 years, beginning her morning routine. She'd be down in 20 minutes, kiss my cheek, pour herself tea, ask what I wanted for dinner. The same rhythm we'd kept for decades. She was 66 now, her hair gone more silver than brown. And somewhere along the road, her morning kiss had begun to feel like obligation rather than warmth. I couldn't say exactly when the change took hold. Maybe it came on slowly. Maybe I simply hadn't been watching closely enough. But I was watching now. I set down my coffee and let my thoughts drift back 8 years, to the night that altered everything, though I had no idea at the time how much. It was late October then, too. Clint had just lost his 3rd job in 2 years. Some mid-level management role he'd described, like a corner office position, but that paid closer to entry-level retail. The call came from Dottie at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. Her voice splintered over the line as she read me the foreclosure notice that had arrived by certified mail. "Harlan, they're going to take the house," she'd wept. 60 days, we have 60 days. I was at my apartment. I'd kept a small place in town, even then told everyone it was for convenience being closer to the shop. Even after the sale, I'd held onto it, spending my days out at the homestead, but retreating there when I needed space to think, without Dottie's eyes tracking me. I ran the numbers in my head. The house needed $87,000 to clear the arrears and refinance. I had 4 times that sitting in accounts Dottie had never laid eyes on a statement for. I made the call that night and told her I'd take care of it. By 10 o'clock, I was seated across from Chet Wallard, the real estate attorney, who'd been working property transactions in Muskingum County for 30 years. Chet was 63, then silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who had cataloged every variety of family financial wreckage and had long since stopped flinching at any of it. "Mr. Crofton," Chet said, sliding the refinance documents across his desk. "The person injecting capital and assuming liability must hold majority equity. That's standard practice. You'll own 65%. I nodded, reading every line. The house would be refinanced in my name as primary borrower. I'd bring the cash to clear the arrears. I'd hold 65% ownership. Clint and Dottie would hold 35%, combined subordinate to my interest. "Where's your son?" Chet asked, glancing at the empty chair beside me. I'd called Clint twice that evening, The first time he'd picked up from somewhere, loud voices music, the unmistakable sound of a bar or a party. Dad, I trust you. If you're handling it, that's fine. I don't need to read paperwork. The second call went to voicemail. He's not coming, I told Chet. The attorney looked at me with an expression I didn't place at the time. Later, I recognized it as pity, the kind reserved for fathers who haven't yet grasped that they're being used. Chet slid a pen across the desk. Then, let's get you protected. I signed every page initialed, every margin, and brought a cashier's check for $92,000 the following week, arrears closing costs, and 6 months of reserves, money drawn from an account tied to the sale of Crofton Auto Repair, a business I'd built and run for 34 years before selling in 2012 for a sum I never disclosed to anyone. I sold that shop to hold this family together. Back then, I believed sacrifice was simply what love required. How many times can a man pay for the same roof before he's entitled to ask who actually owns the deed beneath it? The coffee had gone lukewarm. I set the mug down and stared at the bank statement again. $1,140.96 times over. Clint never came to that signing, never read the documents, never asked what I'd agreed to what I'd paid or what any of it meant. He'd phoned me the following week, voice easy and bright, wanting to know if everything was squared away. All set, I'd told him. Thanks, Dad, you're a lifesaver. That was the whole of it. No follow-up, no curiosity. He went back to his life, assuming the house was still his, that I'd simply cleared a problem the way fathers do. But that wasn't what I'd done. What I'd done was take majority ownership of every board nail, shingle, and acre of the property Clint walked through, like it already had his name on it. I had become his landlord, his creditor, the legal authority over the home he treated as his birthright. And he never thought to ask. Chet had seen this kind of thing before. I could tell by the way he capped his pen without a word and drew the folder shut. Upstairs, I heard the shower come on. Dottie would be down in 15 minutes, right on schedule. I folded the bank statement, returned it to its envelope, and slid it into the drawer where I stored 8 years of identical records. 96 payments, 96 pieces of evidence that I had been carrying this family while they drew up plans I was only beginning to understand. Clint's refusal to show up that night, his breezy arrogance, his certainty that the paperwork didn't concern him, it had all looked like ordinary carelessness at the time. 8 years on, that indifference would turn out to be the most costly mistake of his life. The documents I signed hadn't merely rescued the house. They had made me its majority owner, and Clint never bothered to ask. That ignorance had lived between us for 8 years, like a wall neither of us could see. But over the last 6 months, something had shifted. Clint had stopped performing gratitude and started moving through the place as though the title were already his. Last Sunday, late October, he carved the pork loin from the head of the table. Not a guest seat, not the side chair he'd occupied since he was a boy, the head of the table. The seat that had been mine for 42 years, while I sat 3 places down like a visiting relation. Dottie had arranged it that way without a word. The good china, the linen napkins, the centerpiece of cream dahlias she'd arranged that morning. Clint pulled out the chair, settled into it, and lifted the carving knife as though it had always been his place to do so. I watched without speaking, my fork resting against the plate. Lacey Duvain sat to his right, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. She was 34, a real estate broker, with a precise eye for property value and a smile that read as warm until you noticed it never climbed to her eyes. Her gaze moved around the dining room, tracking the crown, molding the original hardwood floors, the south-facing windows, the way someone measures a space before deciding what to tear out. "This house has wonderful bones," she said, working her knife through the roast. "Original timber, solid foundation. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. It's been in the family a long time," Dot said, her voice bright and rehearsed. "Harlan's done so much work on it over the years." Lacey smiled. "Sweat equity, that's valuable." Clint leaned back in my chair, and draped his arm across the back of Lacey's seat. "We've been looking into some commercial opportunities, real estate development. There's a lot of potential in this area if you know how to work the assets." "What kind of assets?" I asked. Clint waved a hand. "Dad, let's not get into line items in front of guests." I set my fork down. 38 times. That was the 38th occasion in 6 months I'd swallowed a question because the moment wasn't right. Because it would make a scene. Because keeping things smooth had seemed more important than getting a straight answer. I was beginning to see that peace purchased with silence isn't peace at all. Lacey's eyes moved to the built-in hutch along the east wall, then drifted to the bay window and the back acreage beyond it. She wasn't taking in the view. She was sizing up the rooms. The pork loin had no taste. I worked through it mechanically, face giving nothing away. Dottie topped off Clint's water before she got to mine. A small thing. Possibly habit. Possibly not. Every family has a throne. It might be nothing grander than a wooden chair at the far end of the dinner table, but the whole household understands whose place it is, and what shifts the moment someone else occupies it. Clint had planted himself there, and not one person present had raised an eyebrow. I pushed back from the table, after dessert stepped through the back door, and let the cold October air settle around me, while I watched the last of the daylight fade behind the barn. My breath made small clouds in the dark. Inside, Lacey's laughter drifted through the kitchen window at something Clint said, and my mind went back to May. A Tuesday midday warm, beyond anything you'd expect from early spring. I'd been out in the garden, working compost into the soil around the tomato plants Dottie had wanted staked. The back of my neck was burning. I can still place the smell of turned earth, the coo of a mourning dove from the oak tree, the solid pull of the shovel handle. Then it arrived, a crushing pressure that detonated in my chest and drove down my left arm as though my ribcage had been laced with wire and drawn tight all at once. My knees hit first, then my shoulder, and I went into the tomato row I'd spent the morning setting out. The sky reeled. What remained of my vision collapsed to a single blue point. Dot's voice reached me from somewhere far off, urgent and high, saying my name. Then her footsteps. Then the sound of a phone being unlocked, and she didn't call 911. She called Clint. "Get over here right now," she said, voice splintering. "Your father is down." I heard her moving in circles around me, breathing hard. Gravel shifting under each step, her phone pressed to her ear, talking to our son, while I lay face up in the garden bed, with my heart stuttering like a fouled ignition. 3 minutes, maybe 4. I couldn't hold the time. Then she finally dialed the paramedics. By the time they reached me, I was close to gone. By the time the team at Genesis Hospital ran a stent through my femoral artery to open the blockage, I was already sedated and being moved to recovery. Clint walked in 2 hours after the procedure. Button-down shirt, pressed hair, combed back his features, arranged in what was meant to read as worry. "Sorry I'm late, Dad," he said, dragging a chair to the bedside. "Traffic was brutal." I gave him a nod. I had nothing left for words. The morphine drip was keeping the pain managed, but my attention was still cataloging things specifically. The dark smear across his right elbow. Differential oil. No mistaking it. That dense, acrid grease that transfers from a rear axle during service, work the kind that lodges under your nails and sets into cloth so completely that washing barely touches it. 34 years running a repair shop had taught me every variety of automotive grease. I knew that one on sight. Clint had been out of work for 8 months. Unemployed since the retail management job that lasted 11 months finally ended. No paycheck, no prospects, living on what Dottie quietly diverted from the household budget I was financing. Yet there was differential oil on his sleeve. Flat on that hospital bed ceiling, tiles overhead, a fresh stent doing the work my artery couldn't. I turned 2 facts over in my head. Dottie had telephoned our son before she telephoned the people who could keep me alive. And Clint, when the call reached him, had been actively working on a vehicle not home, not idle, but doing something he wasn't accounting for to anyone. I let it go without a question. The morphine thickened my tongue, a nurse was running through my vitals and the opening closed. But I put that detail somewhere safe, the way you file a receipt you don't have a use for yet, but know you will. That's the discipline that 3 decades of diagnosing mechanical failures instills. Evidence doesn't expire. You don't need to read its meaning on the spot. You only need to make sure it doesn't disappear. A smear of gear oil on the arm of a man with no job. Slight. Overlooked by anyone not paying close attention. I was paying close attention. Evidence was something I gathered the way a methodical man gathers anything without sentiment, sorted and stored available when the moment required it. The grease stain went into the running inventory, 96 payments. The C's thrown, Dottie's call sequence, Lacey's calculating gaze. I hadn't yet figured out what the picture was, but something was being assembled. The unsealed envelope turned up on a Friday evening in early November. Dottie passed me a stuffed brown accordion folder while she was clearing the dinner table. "Could you sort through those medical bills? Numbers are more your department." She avoided my eyes as she said it. "I'm turning in early. My head's been pounding all day." A kiss on my cheek, a going through the motions kiss, and she was up the stairs. I sat by myself at the kitchen table, one lamp burning, the rest of the house dark around me. The folder was cinched with a rubber band and packed tight. I laid everything out across the table. Explanation of benefit forms from May. Medicare summaries, prescription receipts, itemized bills from Genesis Hospital covering the stent procedure and overnight monitoring. And underneath all of it, a white envelope, unsealed, legal-sized, made of heavy cotton stock, embossed letterhead, the lettering raised and black. Boone Pelham, attorney, at Law, Zanesville, Ohio. The name meant nothing to me. The flap had been tucked, not glued. I drew out 3 pages unfolded, them hands level, unhurried, steadied by 15 years spent investigating fraud for the county before the shop came along. Last will and testament of Dottie Marie Crofton. First page, slow read. Standard opening language. Revocation of earlier wills named Executor Declaration of Sound, Mind Freedom from Coercion. Second page, the distribution schedule. I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my residual estate, including but not limited to all real property, personal property, financial accounts, and any interest in jointly held assets to my son, Clint Michael Crofton. Absolutely and in fee simple. 100%. Everything. Third page held one sentence folded inside a paragraph addressing spousal entitlement. The husband has been amply provided for throughout the duration of the marriage via independent means, and shall therefore take no share of the residual estate. I went back through it, then a third pass, amply provided for. 8 years, 96 mortgage payments, $87,000 directed toward rescuing a house from foreclosure, while my son occupied bar stools, and my wife put her signature on documents that wrote me out of the future. Amply provided for. I squared the pages against the table's edge and set them down, hands unwavering, pulse steady. Nothing broke the quiet but the refrigerator running and the second hand on the wall clock. What does a legal document say a man is worth the accounts he settled or the portion he receives when everything gets carved up? I crossed to the cabinet over the sink and brought down the bottle of bourbon I kept behind the cooking sherry. Bourbon was a working drink for me, a case drink. It burned away what didn't matter and left the structure of things exposed. 2 fingers in a rocks glass, amber, grain and oak and the smell of it. I set it next to the will and sat with both of them. The envelope was open. That detail registered. An unsealed envelope isn't archived, it's in rotation. Live, accessible. I turned to the date printed at the head of the first page. October 18th, 2023. A fortnight back. Executed while my automatic payment was still running, while I was still pulling out this same chair every morning. Still occupying the role husband, father, household underwriter. Boone Pelham's name sat at the bottom beneath the witness line and the notary's stamp. The official mechanism that converts a private betrayal into an instrument the courts will enforce. I had never crossed paths with this lawyer. Dottie had never dropped his name. No invoice, no retainer copy had ever passed through my hands, which meant she'd paid him from a pool I didn't have visibility into. I brought the glass up. The bourbon landed clean and sharp. 15 years running fraud cases taught me one reliable truth. The second the anger drains out of you is the second you become effective. By rights, I should have gone upstairs in a fury, should have stood in the doorway and demanded she account for herself. The weight of 42 years condensed into a dismissive subordinate clause that should have broken something in me. It didn't. Instead, I went cold, precise. The same interior stillness I used to find when I sat across a table from someone who'd been filing false disability claims or hiding employment income. Like an investigator, and that frightened me more than anything on those 3 pages. Because once that mode engaged the case builder, the document follower, the man who stacked evidence until there was nowhere left to run, it didn't disengage until the file was closed. I lifted the will a second time. This time, I was reading for what it omitted, what it gestured at without stating, what it opened up. Why had the envelope been left unsealed? Why was this document buried in medical paperwork rather than stored somewhere secure? When had Dottie first placed a call to Boone Pelham? Was Clint aware of its existence? Was Lacey? And how much else was out there that I hadn't yet held in my hands? I refolded the pages with care, slid them back into the envelope, and set it precisely where I'd found it. Layered the medical bills on top, snapped the rubber band back around the folder, left everything the way Dottie had handed it to me. Then I picked up my rocks, glass walked to the sink, and tipped the bourbon down the drain. Whiskey wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to become invisible, not angry. That was the part that unsettled me. Invisible meant ordinary. It meant showing up to Sunday dinner, reaching across for the salt, complimenting the food, and saying nothing about a will. Because the first rule of investigation is simple: never tip off a target that you've found the evidence. The following Sunday, mid-November, 3 weeks since I'd watched Clint occupy my chair for the first time, I took my seat 3 places down again and watched the same theater in a fresh set of clothes. This time, Lacey had brought a leather portfolio to the table, alongside the carving knife I'd used for 42 years. Clint had the sleeves of his button-down, rolled to the elbow, handling the carving fork with the ease of a man who believed he'd earned his place at the head of things. Lacey sat to his right, her attention drifting across the dining room walls as though she were already selecting paint swatches. She was put together in the way that takes effort to conceal cashmere, a thin gold chain, an air of quiet money. Dottie carried in a bowl of green beans and took her chair. The good china out again, linen napkins the same cream dahlias from the week before, starting to droop at the edges. "So," Clint said, lowering the carving fork and fixing me with the look of someone bearing welcome tidings. "Lacey and I have been talking. We think the time has come for us to move back here full-time, take some of the heavy lifting off your hands. This acreage needs people with the energy for it. Not a question, not a request, a pronouncement." Dottie smiled, hands folded neat in her lap. "That's so thoughtful, sweetheart." Lacey reached across and covered Clint's hand with hers. "We want to really invest in this place, give it what it deserves." I worked my knife through the roast, chewing deliberately. Tender, well-seasoned, tasted like nothing. "And what's your plan for contributing to the property taxes and monthly overhead, Clint?" I asked, keeping my voice level, genuinely curious in tone. Clint's smile went tight at the corners. "Dad, let's not turn a family dinner into a budget meeting." Dottie moved quickly to fill the gap, voice bright. Harlan passed the rolls, fresh from the bakery. I passed the rolls. Lacey's gaze traced the crown molding overhead, then dropped to the hardwood floors, then settled on the south-facing windows. She wasn't appreciating the craftsmanship. She was running mental measurements, load-bearing walls, renovation potential, what could be opened up, and what would cost to remove. There's a gap between living inside a house and holding the deed to it. Lacey was occupied with the first, while knowing nothing about the second. "We're thinking late January for the move." Clint went on, heaping potatoes onto his plate. "Gives us enough runway to sort out logistics close up my apartment, get everything organized." "That sounds just right," Dottie said. I nodded, drank some water, and offered nothing further. The table talk shifted to easier ground. The weather coming and plans for Thanksgiving, a neighbor's new roof. I answered when addressed, past dishes when requested, kept my expression neutral. Invisible. 3 days on Wednesday night, I was in my workshop, a corner of the detached garage I'd converted into a home office, housing the filing cabinets where I kept business records and the old desktop I still used for email. The room held the smell of motor oil and sawdust. Familiar, steadying. I was going through mortgage auto-pay confirmations when my phone buzzed with a notification. "Lacey Duvain has added you to the board, our forever home." I looked at the screen for 3 full seconds. Then I opened the app. 38 images loaded in a grid, high-resolution photographs pulled from design publications and contractor portfolios. Farmhouse sinks with industrial hardware, reclaimed timber floating shelves, wide plank oak flooring in a tone 3 shades lighter than what currently ran through the house, shiplap feature walls, Edison pendants suspended over a kitchen island that did not exist. I moved through them, slowly, thumb steady. One image showed the dining room wall between the kitchen and living space marked up in red. Lacey's handwriting in the margin load-bearing demo cost $8,000. The next showed the upstairs bathroom stripped to the studs, new tile, freestanding soaking tub, frameless glass enclosure. Estimated cost $14,200. I kept going. The most recent upload was a scanned contractor estimate on formal letterhead. Itemized demolition, framing, electrical, plumbing, finish work. Total in bold at the bottom, $67,400. The caption read, "Contractor estimate first phase. Clint says mom can cover the initial deposit from the joint savings account. Closing consult scheduled for December 10th. The joint savings account, the one Dottie and I had opened in 1997. The one I'd been steadily rebuilding over the past 8 years, moving $2,000 every quarter from accounts she had no knowledge of. The balance stood at just over $93,000. They were planning to tear into the walls of my house using money I had put there. I took a screenshot of the contractor estimate, then the load-bearing wall markup, then all 38 images, one after the next, methodical in sequence. I built a new folder on the desktop evidence home and saved every screenshot with timestamps and file names keyed to the board's upload order. Then I checked the member list. Lacey Duvain, admin, Clint Crofton, Dottie Crofton, Harlan Crofton. I could have dropped myself from the list with a single tap and left no trace of having seen any of it. I didn't. I left my name exactly where Lacey had put it, visible active, because sometimes the strongest evidence is the evidence a thief places in your hands and walks away from. They had decided I was too far past my era to navigate a Pinterest board and a contractor app. Figured I'd catch the notification and be baffled, maybe bring my phone to Dottie and ask her what it was. They had that wrong. I set the phone down and leaned back in the metal folding chair. Cold November air pressing in through the garage walls. My breath made faint clouds in the unheated space. $67,400. A deposit drawn from savings I'd rebuilt quarter by patient quarter, earmarked for demolishing walls in a structure I held 65% ownership of. I saved every image and left my name on the list. I'd spent 15 years learning that people who commit fraud always leave a trail. Sometimes it's in falsified spreadsheets, sometimes forged signatures. Sometimes it's a Pinterest board they're confident you're too dated to read. What I hadn't prepared for was evidence reaching out and calling me. The phone rang at 11:23 p.m. on a Thursday. I was in the dark of my apartment, the separate place I'd held onto. All these years, the one no member of my family had ever set foot in, flat on my back, staring at the ceiling, cycling through the inventory. 96 payments, the will, the renovation board, the grease on Clint's sleeve, the phone screen cut through the dark. Unlisted number, local area code. I picked up on the third ring. Hello. Silence. Not the hollow silence of a dropped connection or a robocall pause. This had mass to it. Presence. Someone on the other end with their breath held deliberately. I waited, phone to my ear. Then I heard its shallow, ragged respiration. The sound of someone working hard to stay inaudible while their lungs gave them away. In, out, uneven, frightened. I'm here, I said quietly. You can talk. The breathing caught, held. The line went dead. I pulled the phone from my ear and read the screen. Call ended. Duration 47 seconds. I saved the number, unknown Zanesville. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand and thought about what silence means. In 15 years of fraud work, I developed a feel for the difference between the silence of a misdial and the silence of a witness who has something to say and can't get it out yet. This was the second kind someone frightened down to the bone. Frightened people have reasons, usually solid ones. Someone else in this town was aware of what was happening inside that house. It had tracked down my number, had chosen late night when no one would overhear, but hadn't yet found the words. I lay there listening to the radiator cycle on and off in the dark, wondering who else had been watching. Saturday afternoon, late November. Cold sky gray, the yard smelling of wet leaves going soft. I was in the tool shed behind the garage, working solvent and a wire brush into the carburetor of an old lawnmower when Cody showed up. 9 years old, slight for his age. Clint's dark hair, Dottie's sharp eyes. A puffy winter coat that swallowed him whole, and light-up sneakers the kind his father would have called impractical, but that every kid his age was after. Hey, Grandpa, he said, dragging a low wooden stool across the concrete floor and dropping onto it with his legs dangling. Hey, kiddo, what brings you out here? Dad's doing sales calls. Mom said I should stay out of the way. Sales calls. That was Clint's label for whatever he was doing in the garage bay at the far end of the property, the one with the roll-up door and the oil stains ground into the concrete that no amount of scrubbing had ever lifted. I lowered the carburetor into the solvent pan and watched the old fuel deposits break apart. The sharp chemical bite of the solvent filled the shed, familiar and steadying. Cody swung his legs back and forth on the stool, watching me. Then, out of nowhere, Grandpa, is this house yours or Daddy's? I slowed the wire brush mid-stroke over the fuel bowl, kept my voice easy. Why do you ask? I heard Daddy and Lacey talking yesterday in the kitchen. He picked at a loose thread on his coat sleeve. Daddy said this house is already his, and you're just staying here until you get too old. The brush slipped a fraction in my fingers. I set it down on the workbench, wiped my hands clean on a rag stained with old oil, and turned to face my grandson. His legs had gone still. "Tell me what we're fixing right now," I said. Cody blinked. "The carburetor." "And who's the only person in this yard who knows exactly how the fuel moves through it?" He thought that over for a moment. "You, Grandpa." I turned back to the bench, lifted the carburetor, and held the needle valve up to the light reading glasses balanced on the end of my nose. "That's right." Cody sat studying me, his small face working to process an answer that hadn't really been one. He was 9, property law was entirely beyond him, but he understood the certainty behind what I'd said. Children tell the truth. Adults learn to conceal it, not out of malice always, but because they've been taught which conversations belong behind closed doors. Clint was already planning a story inside his own son's head, that I was a temporary presence, an old man marking time in someone else's house until age made me inconvenient enough to remove. The narrative was being assembled in real time, piece by piece, normalized inside the mind of a 9-year-old who would grow up believing his grandfather had been nothing more than a long-term house guest. "Grandpa," Cody's voice came softer now. "Yeah, kiddo. Are you going to get too old?" I set the carburetor down and looked at him straight. His eyes were wide and worried in the particular way children's eyes go when they sense a grown-up problem they don't have the language for. "Not for a long time," I said. "And when I do, I'll make sure you understand exactly how things work." "Fair," he gave a slow nod. "Fair. Now hand me that flathead screwdriver, the small one." He slid off the stool and dug through my toolbox until his hand closed around it, then passed it over with the careful seriousness kids save for moments when they're trusted with real tools. I went back to the carburetor. Cody climbed back onto the stool leg, swinging again. The crisis dissolved the way only childhood allows it to, but I wasn't going to let him grow into a man who believed his grandfather had been a tenant paying rent on a house built with his own hands and his own money. That wasn't the inheritance I was leaving behind. The anonymous phone call, Cody's question, the renovation board, the will. Everything was pointing the same direction. My family had already decided I was functionally gone, a ghost still taking up floor space while they worked to make it legal. They were wrong, and I intended to demonstrate that. Demonstrating it required evidence. And evidence, as I had learned across 15 years of fraud work, has a way of surfacing on its own schedule once you stop hunting and start being still. The notification appeared on my phone at 9:17 p.m. on Monday, November 25th. I was on the couch in my apartment, half following the local evening news. Channel 7, same station I'd watched for 20 years, same anchor desk, same weather maps. The screen flashed in the dim room. "Lacey Duvain has added you to the group chat, Christmas Logistics." I held the phone and read that line for 3 full seconds before opening it. The thread unspooled. 47 messages time-stamped across the previous 6 days. I scrolled to the beginning and worked forward. November 19th, 8:42 p.m. Clint. "The old man is just a breathing wallet at this point. Let him cover the mortgage for a few more cycles, then the title transfer goes live." November 20th, 10:15 a.m. Lacey. "How confident are you with Boone? We can't have any loose ends." November 20th, 11:03 a.m. Clint Boone is locked in. He's been working state law for 30 years, knows every probate judge in Muskingum County. November 21st, 3:27 p.m. Dottie. "I took care of the signature verification with Hall. The new will is sealed. The old man won't have a single legal leg to stand on." November 22nd, 9:58 p.m. Clint medical guardianship and conservatorship filing goes to Boone next week. Once that's in motion, we control everything. Bank accounts, property decisions, medical care, the whole estate. November 23rd, 7:14 a.m. Lacey. "Will the judge interview him directly?" November 23rd, 7:19 a.m. Clint. "He can't even remember what station the evening news is on. He'll execute the case against himself just by talking." November 25th, 9:02 p.m. Lacey. By Christmas morning, he'll be on his knees thanking us for taking care of everything. Then we pull the trigger on phase 2. I kept going. More messages below, contractor timelines, demolition, schedules, a scanned image of the renovation estimate I'd already cataloged. A remark from Clint about my expression when I discovered the garage bay was being converted into Lacey's home office. They were discussing me as though I were already in the ground, guardianship and conservatorship. I had watched those exact instruments strip 3 elderly estates to the bone. I knew every weakness in that framework. I began screenshotting first message, then the next, then everyone in sequence, my thumb moving with the mechanical efficiency of long practice. 90 seconds after I'd opened the thread, the typing indicator appeared. Clint Crofton is typing. Then the screen shifted. You have been removed from Christmas logistics. I held my eyes on those words for 5 seconds. Then I opened the photo gallery and counted 47 screenshots. Every message, every timestamp, every participant's name fully visible. 90 seconds. In 15 years as a fraud investigator, I had never had a target deliver an unredacted confession directly into my hands. I set the phone on the cushion beside me, leaned back and listened to the weather segment run through cold fronts and lake effect snow advisories. The anchor mentioned safe driving conditions. I was thinking about breathing Wallet's Christmas mornings, and a judge who'd be invited to watch a man stumble through questions about which news station he watched. Channel 7. 20 years, same desk, same maps. They say luck rewards the prepared. I'd been preparing for 8 years, one mortgage payment at a time. Now they'd delivered the confession themselves. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I sat at the bedroom desk beneath the single brass lamp I reserved for serious paperwork. The heavy leather-bound investigation ledger lay open in front of me, the same style I'd used for 15 years, tracking field cases, building evidence chains, assembling files that held up in court and produced convictions. The leather had gone smooth at the corners. The spine was cracked from years of opening. I turned to a clean white page. At the top, in careful block capitals, I wrote Case File, The Crofton Alliance. Opened November 25th, 2023. Then I ruled 3 vertical columns. First column, Evidence Secured. I cataloged each item with the precision I'd applied to welfare fraud and disability cases. Group chat screenshots, 47 messages time-stamped. Renovation board images, 38 files. Contractor estimate $67,400. Unsealed will dated October 18th, 2023. Attorney Boone Pelham. Refinance documents 8 years prior. 65% ownership secured. Mortgage auto pay records 96 consecutive payments. $1,140 monthly. Clint's differential oil stain. May 2023 unemployed status contradicted. Second column, evidence required. Clint's unrecorded cash transactions, illegal vehicle flipping, verify via county sales records, fraudulent transfer deeds Boone is drafting, subpoena attorney records if necessary, exact dates of Dottie's meetings with Boone, established timeline of conspiracy, medical guardianship petition and documents obtained before filing to preempt, financial account access logs confirm whether unauthorized withdrawals have taken place. Third column, tactical actions. Engage Ernie Patton independent audit/legal strategy consultation. Audit the red metal toolbox. Confirm cash reserve is intact. Retain independent legal counsel outside Zanesville. Avoid local conflicts of interest. Document all future family interactions, recording device, and written logs. Secure original refinance deed in a safety deposit box. Prevent document tampering. At the bottom of the page, I wrote one final line and put 2 underscores beneath it. Do not strike until the perimeter is absolute. Patience is the only weapon that never jams. I set down the pen and looked at the page. This was the 2001st case file I'd opened across my career, but the first time the primary targets had ever called me Dad. I closed the ledger, the leather cover dropping shut with a dull thud that rang louder than it should have in that still room. Killed the lamp. Sat in the dark a moment, letting my eyes find their footing. Beyond the glass, Zanesville was vanishing under a fresh skin of winter frost. Streetlights bloomed in the cold. The neighborhood held its breath, nothing but the far-off groan of a snowplow grinding along the main road. Inside, a different kind of machine had just clicked on, and this one had no off switch. The The first gear in that machine was Ernie Patton, and I'd been waiting 8 years to set him in motion. Tuesday morning, November 26th. I slid the manila folder across the scarred diner table to the one man in Zanesville who'd spent 30 years running down white-collar criminals for the IRS, and who'd been my closest friend for 40. The diner sat near the old B&O rail yard, the kind of place truckers found for coffee at 5 in the morning, and where the waitress already knew your order before you'd settled into the seat. Corner booth, cracked vinyl, 2 cups of black coffee steaming between us. Soft acoustic music drifted from the kitchen speakers, just loud enough to swallow conversation. Ernie Patton was 71, still razor sharp. The same caliber of auditor he'd been across 3 decades before he hung it up. Silver haircut, military close reading glasses riding the tip of his nose. Hands that moved with the careful precision of a man who'd spent a career dismantling financial crimes, one receipt at a time. He opened the folder without a word and went to work. I watched him move through the evidence, the group chat screenshots, the renovation board, images the unsealed will, with its single dismissive line about independent, means the timeline I'd typed out, threading the dots from the refinance 8 years back to the guardianship petition they were gearing up to file. His pen scratched short lines into a small black memo book, the same style he'd carried for 30 years, filled with notes that had become federal cases. Pure reflex investigator muscle memory. No interruptions, no clarifying questions. He just read, absorbed, documented. Men who've spent 30 years catching tax evaders don't need hand-holding or long explanations. They listen, take notes, and begin building the trap. When he finally looked up, his face gave nothing away. "Do you still have the complete closing folder from the refinance?" he asked. I nodded. Every page original signatures, notarized deed title, insurance policy. Ernie tapped his pen against the rim of his coffee cup, thinking. The rhythm was slow, deliberate. Outside, a freight train pushed past on the old rail yard line, shaking the glass in its frame. "Good," he said at last. "That's our anchor. Give me 48 hours to check the federal loan registries. I've got an old key that might fit this lock, but I need to make sure the bank hasn't changed the cylinders." I took a sip of coffee. Bitter, overbrewed, perfect. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking your son is about to learn the difference between planning a crime and executing one." He closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "Don't say a word at home. Act normal. Let them think you're still the breathing wallet." "That won't be hard." Ernie almost smiled. 40 years, Harlan. I haven't backed the wrong horse yet." He got up, set a $10 bill on the table for the coffee, and walked out without a backward glance. I stayed in that booth another 5 minutes, watching steam curl off my cup, listening to the clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the low murmur of truckers at the counter, trading weather reports and road conditions. Then I drove home and went looking for the anchor. Wednesday afternoon, I headed down to the basement workshop, the unfinished concrete space beneath the apartment where I kept my tools and anything I didn't want found. The heavy red Craftsman toolbox sat under the oak workbench exactly where I'd left it 8 years ago. 5 feet wide, industrial-grade steel, the kind a mechanic accumulates over a lifetime of precision work. I hauled it out casters, squealing against the concrete, and opened the top lid socket sets, wrenches, screwdrivers ranked by size in the removable upper tray. Underneath that tray, a false sheet metal floor. I'd put it in myself 15 years back during the fraud investigation years, when I needed somewhere secure to keep sensitive documents away from the office. The compartment was shallow but wide and visible, unless you already knew about the 2 recessed finger holes at the edges. I lifted the false floor. Resting inside was a thick blue plastic folder, the kind law firms use for closing packages. I carried it to the workbench and set it under the single overhead halogen bulb. The folder was labeled in black marker Refinance 2015. I unfolded the certified copy of the warranty deed and spread it flat across the scarred wooden surface. Heavy paper official, embossed with the Muskingum County Recorder's seal. I read the legal description, line by line, property address, parcel number, meets and bounds, easements and encumbrances. Then halfway down the second page, under the heading, Ownership Interest, 65%. Majority tenant in common ownership share, Harlan Eugene Crofton primary title holder, 35%. Minority tenant in common ownership share, Dottie Marie Crofton and Clint Michael Crofton jointly. I'd spent 8 years believing I was keeping my family's head above water, never once recognizing I was fortifying my own legal position, and they'd been too arrogant to check the blueprints. My name sat at the absolute top of the registry. Not cosigner, not guarantor. Primary title holder with majority ownership. I lowered myself onto my workshop stool, the metal cold through my jeans, and stared at the document. A will can only pass on what the deceased actually possesses at the moment of their last breath. Dottie's will left everything to Clint, 100% of her estate. The group chat had declared the house, the property, all assets. But Dottie only owned 17.5%. Clint owned the other 17.5%. Between them, they controlled 35% of the property they were already mapping out for renovation, demolition, and rebuilding with my money. I owned the other 65%, had owned it for 8 consecutive years. I sat without moving for 10 minutes, listening to the furnace kick on in the corner, the whoosh of forced air through the ductwork, the distant bleed of traffic from the street above. Then, I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a yellow highlighter, the same tool I'd used for 15 years, to pick fraudulent clauses out of auto insurance claims, welfare applications, disability petitions. I uncapped it and drew a clean, bright line beneath the percentage. 65% that house Clint was already measuring for new floors. The property Lacey was designing around white farmhouse sinks and load-bearing wall demolitions. 65% of it was mine. It had been mine since the night he was too occupied to show up and read the paperwork. Ownership was the foundation. What Ernie was about to hand me was the leverage to turn that foundation into a fortress. Friday morning, November 29th, same diner booth, same black coffee. Ernie slid a single typed sheet across the scarred table 48 hours after our first meeting, and the plan written on it would transform me from property owner into the bank itself. 2 operations, he said, pressing his index finger to the page. First, the mortgage note. I leaned in. I called an old IRS contact at the commercial lending bank holding your note. They're aggressively clearing non-performing assets before the Q4 ledger closes December 31st. Your loan isn't non-performing, but it's classified as legacy retail, small balance, low yield administrative burden. They want it gone from their books, and Ridgemont Trust can purchase the distressed note at a 38% discount. I submitted a formal offer this morning. The credit committee needs 2 weeks to ratify, but the preliminary feedback is favorable. I stared at him. You're saying I can buy my own mortgage? Not just buy it, own it. You'd hold the note. You'd be Clint's secured lender. If he misses a single payment after the transfer, closes, you foreclose. He wouldn't just lose his inheritance, he'd lose his credit, his collateral, everything. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. I left it alone. Second operation. Ernie continued, dropping his voice a degree. Controlled confusion. What's that? You start acting senile at home in front of them. Misplace your keys, forget names, repeat questions, make them believe you're sliding fast. I frowned. Why? Because an arrogant marksman always rushes his shot when he thinks the target is standing still. I've watched hundreds of tax evaders cinch the noose around their own necks the instant they decided they were the smartest person in the room. If Clint believes you're mentally declining, he'll push his timeline forward. He'll make mistakes. He'll put things in writing he never should, and you'll be there collecting every piece of evidence he drops in your lap. In 30 years investigating tax fraud, I learned one thing above all else. Criminals always talk too much when they think the room is empty, and they always rush the endgame when they think their target is weakening. How long do I keep it up? Until the credit committee closes the note purchase. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Can you do it? I thought about the group chat, the breathing wallet, the renovation board, the will. Yeah, I said, I can do it. That evening, the performance began. I left my truck keys in the sugar bowl, let them sit there for Dottie to discover, while I drifted around the kitchen with a puzzled look on my face. Harlan, they're right here, she said, holding them up with a tight smile that never made it to her eyes. Oh, thank you, dear. At dinner, I asked her 3 separate times to tell me the evening news anchor's name. Channel 7. Dottie, what's that fellow called again? The one with the gray hair. David Marshall Harlan, same as always. Right. David Marshall. 5 minutes later. Dottie, remind me, what's that anchor's name on Channel 7? Her face shifted from irritation into something cooler. Calculation. David Marshall. Honey, are you feeling all right? Just tired. At 9:47 p.m., I was in my workshop when Clint's voice filtered through the side door I'd left cracked open. He was on his cell phone moving back and forth near the driveway. Mom, the old man is sliding fast," he said, voice low and tight. "I mean it. He asked you the same question 3 times tonight. We need to move the paperwork up before he loses the ability to hold a pen." I stood without moving in the dark, taking it all in. "Yeah, I'll ring Boone first thing Monday morning. Get the petition filed by mid-December at the latest. Once the judge signs the conservatorship, we control the accounts, the property decisions, everything. He won't be able to contest it if he can't remember his own address." A pause. "Love you too, Mom." The call ended. His footsteps crunched across the gravel, then his car door opened and closed. I eased the workshop door shut, crossed to my desk, and opened the case ledger beneath the single brass lamp. Entry number 4, December 2023. Subject overheard, coordinating accelerated guardianship timeline with co-conspirator. Petition filing target mid-December. Evidence recorded confirmation via direct observation. Monday night, December 2nd. The phone rang at 11:45 p.m. I was in bed half asleep when the screen lit up the darkened room. Unlisted Zanesville number, the 3rd call. I answered and said nothing. Silence on the other end. But this time, the silence cracked open. A woman's voice hushed and strained, speaking in a rapid whisper like someone transmitting from a locked room. Harlan, listen to me. Now I know what they're drafting with attorney Boone Pelham. I couldn't say anything before, but I have a logbook. I have the dates since June. I sat straight up, feet dropping to the cold floorboards. "Who is this?" I asked quietly. A sudden creak of floorboards came through the line, the unmistakable sound of someone else moving in the same house. Her whisper went frantic. "I have to go. I'll find you." The line went dead. I sat in the darkness, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone fade. June 2023. 1 month after I'd collapsed in the garden with a tomato cage still in my hands. 1 month after the stent went into my chest, Dottie was already sitting across from an attorney working to write me out of my own life. I opened the case ledger under the desk lamp and wrote in careful block letters, "Potential witness. Female Zanesville resident direct knowledge of Boone Pelham possesses contemporaneous notes dating back to June 2023. Do not press. Let the fruit fall on its own." I closed the ledger and sat in the dim glow, listening to the house shift and settle around me. June. They had begun mapping this transition while I was still flat on my back in a sterile recovery room, plastic tubes feeding oxygen into my chest, nurses checking my vitals every 4 hours, my body learning to breathe again around the foreign metal propping my artery open. Dottie had sat beside that hospital bed, held my hand, murmured that everything was going to be fine, and 1 month later, she was in an attorney's office putting her name on documents designed to erase me. They say bad people believe they're alone in the world. That night I understood just how wrong that is, but knowing when they'd started wasn't enough. I needed to understand what legal protections already existed, ones they'd overlooked buried in documents older than the conspiracy itself. Thursday morning, early December, I went down into the John McIntyre Library basement archives, hunting for a fragment of memory from 1986. A protective covenant Dottie's parents had mentioned once, 37 years ago, that my family had long since let slip from mind. The archive smelled of old paper and settled dust, the particular institutional decay that accumulates over decades of records stacked in climate-controlled darkness. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. 2 microfiche machines stood against the far wall, their screens throwing off a pale green glow. Leather-bound registries lined metal shelves from floor to ceiling, arranged by decade and document type. I spent 3 hours working through historic Muskingum County probate records from the late 1980s. Dottie's parents had died within 6 months of each other. In 1986, her father, first her mother, not long after. The property had passed to Dottie through their estate. I could still recall sitting at their kitchen table the year before they passed, listening to her father speak about shielding the homestead from bad actors and fraudsters. He had been a careful man, a planner. I found it on the 4th microfiche reel. Last will and testament of Chet and Nadine Fletcher, probated April 1986, Muskingum County Probate Court. I scrolled through the boilerplate executor appointments, asset distribution, standard legal language. Then on page 7, clause 7. In the event that any designated heir herein engages in fraudulent, deceptive, or criminal conduct, directly related to the title or preservation of this homestead, their residual inheritance right shall be subject to immediate forfeiture upon formal court order, and the title shall revert in perpetuity to the Zanesville Community Charitable Trust. I read it 3 times. It required a specific federal or state criminal conviction to trigger. But the moment Clint was convicted of a federal felony involving property fraud, forgery, or elder abuse, this clause would set off an immediate petition to the Muskingum County Probate Court to strip his inheritance entirely. No family negotiation, no will contest just the judge's signature on a forfeiture order. Dot's own parents had constructed a legal trap 37 years ago to guard the homestead against exactly what their grandson was now preparing to do. I printed the certified copy at the reference desk, folded it into my coat pocket, and walked out to the parking lot, called Ernie from my truck engine, running heat blasting against the December cold. "I've got the third leg of the tripod," I said. He listened while I laid it out. When I finished, he was quiet for 5 seconds. "Clint is getting ready to slide a fresh piece of paper across a lawyer's desk," he said at last. "You're getting ready to slide his grandfather's will right back at him, a document his own mother forgot existed." "Exactly." "Good. Keep it secure. Don't tell anyone." I hung up and sat in the cold cab watching my breath fog the air. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one the enemy left buried in your own backyard. Clint is preparing to inherit his grandfather's will alongside his father's debt, and he has no idea either document exists. Saturday, early December, Clint made his routine weekend visit. I sat in my worn leather armchair in the living room, eyes shut, breathing slow, and even performing the kind of senile afternoon rest that signals age and fading cognition. The small digital recorder rested inside my flannel shirt pocket, its red indicator light blinking silently against the dark fabric. From the kitchen door left open 3 inches, Clint's voice came through clear and unhurried. "The second the holiday passes, we set the clinical evaluation dates," he said. I could hear Lacey's lighter footsteps moving near the sink. "If the 2 panel doctors sign off on the cognitive impairment form, she files the guardianship and conservatorship motions in tandem. The guardianship gives us medical custody. The conservatorship hands over the financial accounts. The Muskingum County probate judge routinely signs them together when the family presents a unified front." "Will the judge interview him directly?" Lacey asked. Clint scoffed. "The man can't even remember what station the evening news is on. He'll make the case against himself just by talking." I stayed completely motionless, breathing slow, eyes closed. The digital tape rolled without a sound in my pocket. In 15 years investigating insurance fraud, I learned this: criminals always document their own crimes because arrogance convinces them no one is listening. And I've been listening with a digital recorder for 30 years. This was the 47th time in my career I'd recorded criminals talking too freely when they believed the room was empty. Tuesday morning, December 10th. I was pouring fresh water into my coffee basket when Ernie called. His voice was flat clinical, the measured delivery of an auditor reading off a routine balance sheet. "The credit committee approved the transaction," he said. "They want the asset off their books before December 31st to clean up their Q4 debt ratios." What came next changed the weight of everything that had already happened, not just what was at stake, but how far the people closest to him were willing to go. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you suspected someone you loved was working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and build your case in silence? They took a 38% discount on the remaining principal. Ridgemont Trust had to wire the funds within 5 business days, and the title transfer would go live on December 20th. I set the kettle down slowly, which means Ernie cut in, which means on December 20th, you're no longer just the 65% title holder on that property. You become the secured lender on the remaining 35%. You are the bank, and a bank doesn't need a family vote to send a foreclosure notice. I looked at my steaming coffee mug, lifted it, took a long, slow sip. The heat stung my tongue sharp and real. "Thanks, Ernie. Don't break out the good glasses yet, old friend. We've still got 15 days left on the clock." I ended the call and stood at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, watching the gray December morning through the window. 15 days. On December 20th, I would stop being the property owner Clint was working to push out. I would become the bank holding his mortgage, the lender who decided whether payments kept coming or everything collapsed. Clint thought he was about to take possession of a house with the door already open. He had no idea the house was now held by his own father's shadow corporation, and his father was the one who decided when the collectors knocked. He didn't know about the 1986 protective covenant that would strip his inheritance the moment a judge signed a felony conviction. He didn't know about the audio recordings capturing his conspiracy in his own voice. He didn't know I held 65% of the property he was measuring for renovations, and in 15 days he wouldn't know I'd become his creditor until the foreclosure notice landed in certified mail. I took another sip of coffee and began counting down the hours, but Clint wouldn't wait until December 20th to make his mistake. He'd make it 2.5 weeks earlier on tape in front of a corrupt attorney who believed he was smarter than the law. Tuesday, December 3rd. Clint steered me up the narrow staircase into Boone Pelham's second-floor office in downtown Zanesville. The mini recorder tucked inside my coat pocket began capturing everything the moment we crossed the threshold. "We're setting up a family trust to protect your medical assets, Dad." Clint set his hand on my elbow, as though I needed steadying. I shuffled forward in my worn winter coat, eyes deliberately unfocused steps, slow and unsteady. The recorder rested in my interior breast pocket, its red light humming silently against the lining. 15 years old still worked perfectly. The office was dim, heavy oak trim, along the walls, yellow desk lamps, throwing weak pools of light across towers of legal documents. Boone Pelham sat behind a mahogany desk that looked both expensive and dated the kind of furniture attorneys buy to project authority they haven't earned. He was 58, going soft in the middle, thinning gray hair, combed sideways with a smile that never made it as far as his eyes. His suit was tailored but cheap. Zanesville attorney, small-town corruption, dressed in polyester blend confidence. "Mr. Crofton, please have a seat," Boone said, gesturing toward the leather chair across from his desk. I lowered myself slowly, letting my coat bunch awkwardly at the shoulders. Boone pushed a thick stack of documents across the desk, his voice dropping into the patronizingly simple register people adopt when they've decided you're mentally slipping. "This is a straightforward family trust arrangement. Very simple. We're consolidating your assets to ensure they're protected for medical care and estate planning purposes. All you need to do is confirm a few signature lines and we'll have everything wrapped up before the holidays." I nodded slowly, staring at the papers as though they were printed in a foreign language. Boone paged through the stack-tapping sections with a gold pen. Here and here, standard trust language, beneficiary designations. And this last page is the title transfer authorization. He moved the signature page directly in front of me. I looked down. My name was already printed on the signature line in a sophisticated cursive script, a font built to mimic human handwriting, smooth, consistent, flawless. It was not my signature. Boone Pelham was explicitly instructing me to sign a document ratifying a signature that had already been forged without my knowledge. Textbook Class 3 forgery under Ohio law, 3 to 11 years, depending on the valuation of the fraud, and he was doing it on tape. In 15 years of fraud investigation, I'd watched dozens of schemes unfold, but I had never seen anyone reckless enough to order a man to verify a signature already forged in his name, on tape, with witnesses in the room. I blinked at the paper, then raised my eyes to Boone, with confusion carefully arranged across my face. "Where exactly does the pen go, Mr. Pelham?" I asked, slowly, my voice carrying a slight tremor. Boone touched the line with his gold pen. "Right there, Mr. Crofton, just your normal signature." I studied the forged cursive for another 5 seconds. Then I offered a weak smile and slid the papers back across the desk. "Let me sleep on it a few days," I said. "Make sure my head is clear. I get turned around easily these days." Boone's smile disappeared. He shot a hard look at Clint. Clint gave a quick nod, his jaw tight. "Next week then, Dad, right before the holidays. We'll get it all finished up." "Sure, son. Next week." I rose slowly, letting Clint take my elbow again as we made our way out. The recorder kept rolling until we reached the street. That same afternoon, I sat in my pickup truck in the John McIntyre Library parking lot, engine off thin wisps of frosty breath rising in the cold December air. I called Ernie immediately. "He did it," I said. Pre-printed cursive font, my name already on the signature line. He told me to ratify it. Complete audio recording. Ernie was silent for 5 seconds. The measured pause of a seasoned auditor weighing implications, not surprise. This isn't a domestic probate dispute anymore, he said at last, his voice flat. The primary mortgage note we're purchasing is federally backed under the Fannie Mae Secondary Housing Credit Pool. Executing, filing, or uttering a forged instrument against a Fannie Mae asset elevates the crime automatically to federal bank fraud. I stared through the frosted windshield at the red brick buildings of downtown Zanesville. Workers were stringing green holiday garlands across the streetlights. "What are the sentencing guidelines?" I asked quietly. Ernie's voice didn't shift. 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, no early parole. I let that settle for a moment. 10 to 20 years federal prison, not state, no chance of reduction. I need exactly 2 more weeks to let Clint execute the final filing, I said. Ernie hesitated. "Are you sure you want to cut it that close?" I watched a woman hang a wreath on a storefront door across the street. Christmas was coming. Lights, family dinners, holiday cheer. "A scammer always hangs himself with his own paperwork," I said. "I just have to let him pull the cord." Ernie was quiet for another beat, then understood. "Keep the recorder running. Document everything. Don't sign anything. I won't. And Harlan. Yeah. The feds require a pristine paper trail. Let him build it. Every document, every meeting, every lie. When this goes federal, they'll want the full conspiracy mapped in his own handwriting." I ended the call and sat in the cold truck cab, watching downtown Zanesville dress itself up for Christmas. 14 more days. Clint thought he was finalizing a family trust. What he was actually doing was assembling a federal fraud case with his own signature, his own voice, his own documented conspiracy. And I was going to let him finish because the trap was already built. He just didn't know whose hands had set it. Watching someone construct their own case is the easy part. The hard part is waiting for the witness who knows what you don't, the person who watched the conspiracy take shape in real time and kept a record. Nobody thought she existed. The soft, hesitant knocking came at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday evening in mid-December. I was at my kitchen table working through bank statements when I heard it 3 gentle taps, barely loud enough to cut through the hum of the refrigerator. I got up, walked to the front door, and pulled it open. Orvie DeLuca stood on my porch mat in the falling snow, the yellow porch light throwing shadows across her face. She was 64, a retired nurse who had lived next door for 20 years. Thick green parka wool scarf gloves, pressing a small red leather pocket journal to her chest, as though the wind might take it. I recognized her breathing immediately, the same shallow, frightened rhythm I'd heard 3 times on the phone at midnight. "Orvie," I said quietly. She nodded once. "Can I come in?" I stepped back and she moved past me into the warmth of the house, snow melting from her boots onto the entry mat. We settled at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where I'd read the will, gone through the group chat screenshots, studied the renovation board, the same table where I'd poured bourbon and stared at evidence while my family plotted upstairs. Orvie placed the red journal between us on the table. A slight tremor ran through her fingers. 30 years in nursing, she said, voice holding, steady where her hands couldn't. When you chart for that long precision becomes reflex. Dates, times, dosages, exact words spoken. You write them down because recollection fades, but ink on paper holds. I studied the journal, pocket-sized, well-thumbed, the kind that rides in a scrub's pocket through a full shift and back again. "Dottie started talking to me in June," Orvie said. "Called it a restructuring plan," her word, restructuring as though you were some failing enterprise instead of the man she'd married. June 2023. 1 month passed. My heart attack, 1 month past the stent procedure, 1 month since I'd crumpled in the garden still gripping a tomato cage. Attorney Boone Pelham's name surfaced in her conversations, come August. Meetings, legal consultations, strategies for the estate. She told Orvie I was slipping, getting confused, losing track, and that the family's assets needed shielding from my poor judgment. Orvie's jaw went hard. Come October, Dottie wasn't hinting anymore. She told Orvie point blank the title paperwork would be executed and finalized before the calendar flipped to the new year. Clint was running the financial piece, Lacey was handling the property valuation, and Boone was drawing up the guardianship filing. Orvie slid the journal across to me. 14 entries, she said. June through October, dates verbatim, quotes, witness observations. Everything a nurse commits to paper when her gut tells her something is very wrong. A nurse's charting instinct doesn't switch off when the shift ends. It follows you home because the only real protection for someone who can't speak up for themselves is an accurate record. I opened the journal with care. First entry, June 18th, 2023. Clean handwriting, tight and methodical. June 18th. Dottie mentioned estate transition planning over coffee. Said L is no longer equipped to handle financial decisions on his own. Discussed attorney consultation scheduled for next week. I turned the page. June 25th, Dottie confirmed meeting with attorney B. Pelham. Stated goal is full transfer of decision-making authority before end of year. Next page, August 3rd. Dottie described Clint's involvement. Quote, Clint is finally stepping up to handle what his father can't anymore. Mentioned property appraisal scheduled. I read on. September 12th. Dottie found it amusing L asking the same question 3 times over dinner. Quote, it's almost too easy. He's doing half the work for us. October 7th. Dottie confirmed guardianship petition draft complete. Attorney expects filing mid-December. Quote, by Christmas this will all be settled. October 22nd. Dottie went over renovation plans with Lacey. Showed her photos of kitchen demolition. Quote, once the papers are signed, we can finally turn this place into something worth keeping. I shut the journal and raised my eyes to Orvie. Hers were wet, but there was no softness in her face. Just resolve. You understand what this costs you, Orvie, I said quietly. You'll never sit on her porch again. One nod, jaw locked. I know that, she said, but you're owed the truth, and giving it to you matters more to me than covering for her lies. 20 years of friendship doesn't unravel without a sound. What happens is your conscience swells until it drowns out the pull of loyalty, and the moment it does, you see clearly that the person in front of you has a greater claim on honesty than the one who lied has on your protection. I went to the stove, got the kettle going, filled 2 mugs with peppermint tea, and set one in front of Orvie. She cupped it in both hands and looked into the rising steam. I should have picked up the phone sooner, she said. Should have put you on notice back in June. You reached out when the time was right for you, I told her. That's the part that counts. Neither of us spoke for a stretch. The wall clock marked the silence and snow ticked faintly against the glass. 14 entries spanning June through October. 5 months of conspiracy written down in a retired nurse's careful hand. While Dottie was mapping the legal architecture of my removal, I was in a hospital bed, relearning how to inhale fully with a metal stent, propping open my artery staff, checking vitals every 4 hours, my legs uncertain on the stairs, my whole world contracted to a cardiac ward. She was seated across a desk from Boone Pelham, plotting my legal erasure while I lay in a recovery room, unsure whether I'd be alive at Christmas. I reached for my tea. Stone cold. I drank it anyway. Those 14 entries didn't just reframe the scheme, they reframed the entire span of the marriage. Every exchange, every small familiar gesture, every morning I had accepted without suspicion. For 42 years, the kiss arrived at the same hour without fail. Thursday, December 12th, the morning after Orvie brought the journal. I was at the kitchen table sports section, open coffee going cold in the mug beside me, pale winter light cutting through the window and laying long shadows across the linoleum. Dottie came through the door from her errands, set paper grocery bags on the counter, the crinkle of sacks, the dull knock of cans finding their shelf, the practiced choreography of a household routine repeated across decades. Then she crossed to where I sat and pressed her lips to the top of my head, same as she had on 10,000 other mornings. You holding up all right, sweetie? Soft voice, a note of worry in it. You seem a little worn out today. I met her eyes. I'm fine, Dottie. Just turning something over in my mind the year we first got this place. Her fingers stilled above the bags for just a beat. The look she gave me wasn't the look of a wife reading her husband's face. It was the flat calibrating gaze of someone running numbers risk, weighed against payoff. The same expression I'd cataloged across years of fraud work when a subject was quietly doing the math. Then warmth flooded back in, smooth and well-rehearsed. Don't tire yourself out, Harlan, she said, moving back to the counter. Clint and I have got everything covered. I nodded. Yeah, you and Clint have it all covered. She hummed something low, filed the milk away, tucked bread into the basket, slid vegetables into the crisper. I looked back at the paper. Under the sports page, my pen scratched one line into the small notebook, writing in my shirt pocket. December 12th morning, kiss on the crown of the head, that calculating look behind her eyes. 42 years, and I had read it as love. 42 years of marriage, 15,000 mornings, with coffee and small gestures and familiar words, and in every one of them I had mistaken the ledger behind her eyes for devotion. But the emotional record wasn't the only evidence accumulating. 2 days before, that Tuesday, December 10th, I had gone back to Boone Pelham's office for the follow-up appointment, 1 week on from the initial visit arranged exactly as Clint had set it up. This time, Boone dispensed with all the legal framing and explanatory language. The old man doesn't need to get bogged down in the paragraphs, Clint, he said, dismissive and unhurried. Just have him ink the line. Clint moved in and settled a heavy hand onto my shoulder. Nothing like a son bracing a father, more like a handler steering his charge. Every word, every shift of weight, every breath drawn in that dim room, with its oak panels and yellow lamplight, went straight onto the recorder in my coat. Boone pressed the gold pen into my palm. "Right here, Mr. Crofton," he said, fingertip on the signature line. "Just your normal signature." The document in front of me was a title transfer authorization legal language designed to lift ownership interest out of my name and into a family trust, with Clint and Dottie at the controls. I accepted the pen and produced a completely incorrect name. Not a rough or shaky rendering of my real signature, a deliberately constructed false one, different letter forms, different spelling, different pen pressure engineered to collapse under any comparison with the refinancing deeds or the promissory note. Neither Boone nor Clint glanced at what I'd written. They drew the page back swiftly satisfied, to have the doddering old man's mark and ready to move on. Boone snapped his briefcase shut, one clean, contented click, and put his hand out to Clint. "Step 1 is locked down," he said. Clint gripped it, grinning. "Appreciate you handling this, Boone. Makes everything smoother." I looked at my thumb, a black smear of ink from the gold pen. The recorder had taken down every syllable, including Boone's instruction, delivered before I even entered the room. Just have him ink it? He doesn't know what day it is anyway. Criminals always commit the same error. They assume. Incompetence breeds blindness. They never bother to examine the signature they're so desperate to file, which is precisely why an investigator learns to write his own name wrong. That forged document had just become an airtight instrument of federal bank fraud because the signature they had witnessed wasn't mine. When they carried it to the county recorder's office and certified it as bearing my valid mark, they would be uttering a forged instrument against federally backed collateral. And I held audio of Boone directing the fraud, Clint's hand on my shoulder, steering me like livestock, the full conspiracy captured in their own voices, on their own timeline, with their own stated intentions. 15 years working fraud had taught me exactly how to assemble a case that couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be bargained down to a misdemeanor, couldn't be waved away as a misunderstanding or an honest error. You document everything. You let them finish the crime. You never cut short a criminal who's busy building his own cell. That evening back at Harlan's apartment, I entered the Tuesday visit into my case ledger, December 10th, 2:30 p.m. Boone Pelham's office. Witnessed execution of fraudulent title transfer, deliberately invalidated signature, full audio capture of conspiracy coordination, federal bank fraud, complete and documented. I shut the ledger and sat in the dark, listening to the radiator knock and hiss. Boone had dropped that deed into his briefcase without the first idea that the signature on the line was legally void because I'd chosen to write it wrong, without the faintest idea that his own voice saying he doesn't know what day it is anyway was sitting on a digital recorder I'd carried through 15 years of investigations. An investigator never fully walks away from the work. You just learn to run the investigation from the inside. The trap was ready. Both traps actually mine and theirs. The only thing left to settle was which one would spring first. You ever observe someone laying a snare for you and realize you're building the identical one for them? Mid-December Sunday dinner. Dottie rose at the head of the table and rang her wineglass with a fork, drawing everyone's attention with the kind of theatrical warmth that would have convinced anyone who hadn't spent the past 6 months watching her engineer a conspiracy. "I have wonderful news," she said, smile wide and bright. This year we'd be hosting Christmas at the homestead, a proper celebration, extended family, neighbors, church friends, the whole community. Invitations had already gone out. She expected at least 20 people. Clint leaned back in his chair, arms folded, smirking at me from across the table. Lacey rested a hand on his shoulder, her face carefully arranged into neutrality. I nodded along at an easy pace, playing the part they'd written for me. "That sounds lovely, Dottie," I said. "A real family Christmas." "Exactly," she said, settling back in her seat. "It's important to have witnesses. It's important to have loved ones around during the holidays." Witnesses. She'd nearly said it aloud because that was the point entirely. This was a stage, a public production engineered to press me into submission, to sign whatever documents they'd drawn up, to capitulate in front of an audience who would all swear afterward that I'd done it freely, surrounded by family warmth and good feeling on Christmas Day. I took a slow sip of water and held Clint's gaze. He thought he was watching an old man buckle under the weight of family expectation. What he was watching was an investigator identifying a move he'd been expecting for weeks. Two chess players each with a hand hovering above the same square. The difference was that I knew exactly which pieces he had remaining. He had no idea I'd already taken his king. December 21st evening, cold and cloudless, the stars sharp overhead. Cody turned up at my apartment door carrying a cardboard box of Christmas lights, knotted and stiff from a year in storage. "Grandma says we need to hang these in the tool shed," he said, "for the party." I took in the 9-year-old on my doorstep backpack, riding his shoulders winter coat 3 sizes too big. "All right, kiddo," I said, "let's get them sorted out." We drove to the homestead together, my old truck working across the icy roads. Cody beside me in the passenger seat, legs swinging, humming, something I couldn't place. Out in the tool shed, I worked from a stepladder, stringing lights along the rafters, while Cody fed me sections of cord, his small hands unhurried and precise. "Grandpa," he said quietly. I looked down. "Are you going to be happy after Christmas?" I stopped, lights in hand, and read his expression, serious, watchful. The same look he'd worn the day he asked whether the house belonged to me or to his father. I came down off the ladder, crouched in front of him, so our eyes were level, and set my hands on his shoulders. "After this Christmas," I told him, "everything is going to be clear for both of us. I promise." He held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Okay, Grandpa." We finished the lights without another word. The tool shed burned warm and gold when we threw the switch. Cody's face broke into his first real smile of the evening. "Looks good," he said. "Yeah," I said. "It does." Christmas Eve midnight. I sat alone at the desk in Harlan's apartment, a single brass lamp throwing yellow light across the worn wooden surface. 3 folders in front of me, color-coded, assembled with the same discipline I'd carried through 15 years of federal case building. Blue folder, financial crimes. The refinancing documents establishing my 65% ownership. The LLC mortgage note purchase confirmed December 20th, 4 days prior, installing me as Clint's secured creditor. The title transfer bearing my deliberately invalidated signature. The audio of Boone instructing me to just ink the line. The group chat screenshots naming me a breathing wallet. Red folder, elder abuse. Orvy's red journal, 14 dated entries June through October. The recording of Clint laying out the guardianship and conservatorship strategy in his own words. Dot's will cutting me out as amply provided for. The May heart attack timeline showing the conspiracy took shape 1 month after I nearly didn't survive. Yellow folder, custody concern. Photographs of Cody's worried face. Documentation of Clint's unemployment set against the differential oil stains that pointed to undisclosed income. The 1986 protective covenant that would strip Clint's inheritance the moment a felony conviction was entered. Notes on Cody's questions about who owned the house, about whether Grandpa would be all right. 3 folders, 3 weapons, 1 Christmas. Every folder held original documents and a complete duplicate set, secured in a safety deposit box at a bank branch 40 miles outside Zanesville, well beyond any corner of the map my family would think to search. This wasn't evidence. It was 3 distinct legal detonators. Blue would set off a federal bank fraud prosecution, 10 to 20 years, no parole. Red would support an elder abuse protective order, an immediate separation. Yellow would open a custody evaluation to shield Cody from the fallout. I wasn't filing a single complaint. I was deploying a layered takedown, built to ensure that no matter which way they turned, no matter what attorney they brought in, no matter how they tried to frame the story, the documentation would be there, waiting. I closed the folders and stacked them into my leather briefcase. Tomorrow morning, Christmas Day, I would pull up to the homestead with those 3 folders in the truck. Dottie would assemble her witnesses, cousins, neighbors, church members, and mount her performance. Clint would produce whatever papers they expected me to sign. and I would produce 3 color-coded folders that would dismantle their conspiracy in front of every person they had gathered to watch me fold. Christmas morning came in with fresh snow and the smell of cinnamon, rolls drifting out of the homestead kitchen. By 10 a.m., 17 people had filled the house, cousins I hadn't laid eyes on in years, neighbors from down the road, old family friends who went back to the days when we first bought the place. Dottie's stage was set. So was mine. By evening, the count had climbed to 23. More cousins, more neighbors, more people to witness whatever was going to unfold inside those walls. The briefcase under my arm weighed 11 pounds. 3 folders, 2 backup drives, 1 future. Christmas Day, 5 o'clock in the evening. The homestead living room and dining room were packed with guests. Laughter bounced off the walls. Holiday music drifted from the old stereo in the corner, Nat King Cole singing about chestnuts and open fires. The scent of roasted meat and cinnamon moved through the air, layering with pine from the tree and candle wax from the centerpieces Dottie had arranged with such exacting care. I stood in the hallway a moment, briefcase in hand, watching the room through the doorway. 23 people, extended family not seen in years, neighbors from down the road, church members Dottie had tended to for decades. All of them crowded into the house on Christmas evening wine, and hand plates balanced on their knees, laughing and talking, as though this were any ordinary holiday. They had no idea what they were about to see. I slipped the briefcase into the hall closet, tucking it behind a row of winter coats where it would sit out of sight until I needed it. Then I walked into the living room. Ernie Patton sat quietly in the corner armchair near the fireplace, a glass of water held in one hand, his face composed and unreadable. He'd come an hour ahead of the guests, told Dottie he was an old acquaintance from my days running the shop, and planted himself exactly where he needed to be. Orvie DeLuca had taken up a spot near the kitchen exit, exchanging quiet words with one of Dottie's friends from church. Every so often her gaze would drift my way, the measured look of someone who already knew how the evening would end. Dottie was luminous. No other word fits. She worked the room the way a born hostess does, topping off drinks, soaking up praise for the decorations, resting a hand on someone's arm, throwing her head back at a joke. In her mind, every person under that roof was about to watch me fold, put my name on whatever paperwork Clint had drawn up, and hand over what was mine. She believed she was engineering my humiliation in plain sight. What she'd really done was handpick my jury. Every one of those 23 people she'd gathered to watch me break would end up confirming what I brought to the table. She designed his courtroom without knowing it. "So wonderful having everyone here," Dottie called out, her voice rising above the background music. "This Christmas means something extra." Across the room, Ernie caught my eye and said barely above a murmur, "Good crowd." A slight nod was all I gave back. 23 pairs of eyes, her doing, not mine. I was nothing but grateful. Dinner hit the table at 5:30. Carved roast beef, au gratin potatoes, buttered corn, warm rolls, cranberry sauce in a crystal bowl. Dottie ran the meal like a stage director, marshaling plates from the kitchen, making sure nobody sat with an empty glass or a bare fork. Clint drifted through the gathering, wine bottle in hand, easy and proprietary in his movements. He stopped behind my chair, leaned down and let a smirk settle onto his face. "Dad, you're awfully quiet tonight," he said. "Everything okay?" I looked up at him. "Just grateful to be here, son," I said, very grateful. His hand came down on my shoulder, the same grip, the same pressure he'd used sitting across from Boone Pelham, and then he moved along. Lacey tracked the two of us from the far side of the table, face blank but eyes working. Dottie found her chair at the end of the table, my end the one I'd occupied for 42 years, and lifted her glass toward the room. "Harlan's always been a man of few words," she said, wrapping the line in practiced sweetness. "But we love him anyway." A courteous ripple of laughter went around the table. I ate without hurrying, filing away faces, clocking exits, glancing at my watch. 6:15. There's a thin line between a witness and an accomplice. Usually it comes down to where they happen to be looking. Dessert plates came off the table by 6:20. Pecan pie, whipped cream coffee, and china cups. Dottie saved for occasions that mattered. Then she pushed back her chair and stood. A fork against crystal, one clean ringing note that silenced every conversation in the room. Heads turned. The music dropped away to nothing. She let her eyes travel across all 23 faces before they landed on mine. This was the moment she'd constructed the platform she'd built herself, the lines she'd been practicing. My hand drifted toward the inside pocket of my jacket, where a USB drive sat, waiting a full backup of every recording, every screenshot, every document housed in those 3 folders. 2 people, 1 room, completely different scripts. Her platform, my evidence same, 4 walls. "I'd like to say a few words." Dottie began, her voice carrying that particular warmth she could dial up on, command something about family, loyalty, and truth. I nearly let myself smile because those 3 words were precisely how I'd planned to open. Family, loyalty, truth. Her version was going to be about how a family rallies around its oldest members, how genuine loyalty looks like stepping in before someone causes themselves harm, how truth sometimes means admitting you've lost your grip on things. My version was going to be about how a family doesn't put a forged pen to legal documents, how loyalty and conspiracy don't occupy the same sentence, how truth has a paper trail, recordings, notarized affidavits, time-stamped evidence. Same 3 words, entirely different indictments. Dottie held her glass up toward the candlelight arm, raised the gesture of someone ready to pronounce a verdict. 23 sets of eyes fixed on her, leaning in. Clint sat with his arms folded, spine against the chair back, radiating the ease of a man who thinks he's already won. Lacey's hand was on his shoulder, and from somewhere beyond, the neighbors and cousins and church acquaintances who had no idea what was about to happen, Ernie's eyes found me through the crowd, the tiniest nod. "Ready?" "So was I, Dottie. So was I." But Dottie never got the floor. Clint took it first. He was standing before her. Next word left her mouth. "Fork." "Crystal." 3 hard strikes that rang through the room the way a gavel commands a courtroom. Every voice stopped. The music receded. 23 faces swung away from Dottie and toward Clint. He arranged his features into something warm and pained the look of a loyal son doing something that cost him. "Before Mom goes on," he said, his delivery smooth and rehearsed, "there's something pressing on this family that I have to bring into the open. Dad hasn't been himself lately, forgetting things, losing track of the finances. We've had some hard talks, and the time has come for professional oversight." The room locked up. I sat without twitching a muscle, watching my son work the crowd. "I know this is difficult to hear," Clint went on, tone balanced precisely between tenderness and authority. "But we care about Dad too much to let him keep making choices that put him at risk. Effective January 1st, I'll be taking on full administrative management of the estate, so everything stays on solid footing." His hand went into his jacket. Out came a bound legal document, cream paper, proper binding, exactly the kind of thing Boone Pelham would run off on his most expensive letterhead. It traveled across the table and stopped in front of me. "Let's sign this tonight, Dad," he said, soft and certain. "Right here with everyone who loves you watching." The room held its breath. There it is. Elder abuse scripted and performed for an audience. Every phrase Clint used came straight from the clinical playbook, the same terminology Ernie had laid in front of me weeks before as a primer on how abusers frame their moves, hard talks, professional oversight, choices that put him at risk, manipulation dressed in the language of concern, delivered with a warm smile. You ever sit across from someone running a script? They have no idea you've memorized cover to cover. I looked at the document sitting on the table in front of me, left it untouched, didn't shift in my seat. Then I got to my feet. The room went quiet, back straight, gaze steady, hands completely still. I crossed to the hall closet, swung it open, and drew out my briefcase from under the pile of winter coats where I'd tucked it away that afternoon. Carried it back to the dining room. Every pair of eyes in the room followed the walk. I placed the briefcase on the table, popped the latches 2 clean snaps, and lifted out 3 folders each, a different color, blue, red, yellow. Set them down in a row like courtroom exhibits, because that's precisely what they were. "I want the exact same thing you do, son," I said, keeping my voice level. "Witnesses." Clint's composure cracked just for a moment. "Dad, what are you—" "Everyone at this table is about to see something," I said. "You included." Dot's wine glass came down against the table with a sharp clink. Lacey's fingers dug into Clint's shoulder. Ernie didn't move a fraction, his face giving away nothing. Orvie held her post near the kitchen exit and watched. I lifted the blue folder. "Uncle Floyd," I said, letting my eyes travel 3 seats down to my younger brother. Floyd Crofton was 71 years old, 3 decades retired from his career as a Muskingum County auditor, the family's steady, unassuming numbers, man. He'd never fudged a figure, never raised his voice over a dispute, never planted himself on one side of a family argument. He came to Christmas the same way year after year, quiet, pleasant, expecting nothing more charged than dessert and small talk. His eyes came up to meet mine with something careful in them. 30 years auditing county records, I said. Tell this room what you're looking at. I pushed the blue folder toward him. He paused, then fished his reading glasses from his shirt pocket, the wire-rimmed pair he'd been wearing since I could remember, and settled them onto his face. He opened the cover. 3 seconds was all it took for curiosity to drain out of his expression and something like disbelief to replace it. He lifted the top page with the deliberate hands of a man who'd spent his working life handling documents with consequences. Harlan, he said, his voice barely above a murmur. This is a forensic financial analysis. That's correct, I said. This is not appropriate, Dottie said, her voice going taut. It's Christmas. I kept my eyes on Floyd. Keep going, I said. He moved to the second page, then the third, hands working with the unhurried precision of someone who knew that the papers in front of him had put people away. 3 folders, 3 verdicts, 1 room full of witnesses. Yet what you're all looking at, I said, opening it to the room, is a documented conspiracy one that started in June of this year, 30 days after I collapsed with a heart attack in the backyard garden. Clint shoved his chair back and stood. Dad, this is... It's sit down, I said. He sat. Floyd drew a single sheet from the stack, bold text across the top, notarized signature comparison analysis. His hand had a slight tremor as he raised the page toward the light. 2 signatures side by side, both supposedly mine. The first was genuine, the one I'd put on the refinancing documents 8 years back, the same signature recorded on the deed reflecting my 65% ownership stake. The second was a pre-formatted cursive font built to pass as handwriting, but generated by a computer. The signature Clint and Boone Pelham had placed on the title transfer documents they'd been trying to get me to rubber stamp. Floyd studied both signatures for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to Clint, then to me. One of these is real, Floyd said quietly. One of these is forged. The color left Clint's face. Dot's breathing went shallow. Lacey pulled her hand from Clint's shoulder and stepped back. Floyd turned to the next page, the LLC formation document recording Ridgemont Trust's purchase of the mortgage note on December 20th. The paperwork that made me Clint's secured creditor. The paperwork that meant I was no longer simply a property owner. I was the bank, and the bank was about to call the loan. Floyd cleared his throat, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, and began reading aloud. His voice measured, clinical, quietly devastating, settled over the silent room, the way a coroner's report does. Subject, Harlan Eugene Crofton. Property analysis, 3-acre residential homestead, Zanesville, Muskingum County, Ohio. Floyd's finger tracked down the column of text. Subject, Harlan Crofton, retains 65% ownership interest as primary title holder. LLC entity Ridgemont. Trust Holdings owns the first mortgage note as secured creditor. Conclusion. Subject is creditor, not debtor. Nothing broke the silence except Floyd's voice and the faint hiss of candles burning toward their bases. What that means, I said, keeping my voice level, is that I don't just own this house. I am your bank, Clint. You've been paying me rent every month without knowing it. Dot's wine glass trembled in her grip. I lifted the blue folder and held it up so the room could see it. Bdices. Blue folder, I said. Ownership proof. Refinancing documents from 8 years ago, establishing my 65% majority stake. LLC formation. Documents dated December 20th, 5 days ago, transferring the mortgage note into my control. Every page certified, notarized, recorded with the county. I set it down and picked up the red one. Red folder. Audio recordings of my son and his attorney discussing guardianship petitions and forged signatures. Witness testimony from a neighbor who documented 14 separate conversations about this conspiracy, starting in June, 1 month after I nearly died of a heart attack. Floyd was still working through the blue folder, his auditor's eyes moving line by line, checking dates and signatures the way he'd done it for 3 decades. Every document here is certified, Floyd said quietly. Notarized, legally recorded. I reached for the yellow folder. Yellow folder. a protective covenant written by Dottie's own parents in 1986 that automatically strips inheritance rights from any heir convicted of fraud against this property. A promissory note showing Clint owes me $200,000 in fraudulent transfers. And a federal wire fraud warrant reference number, because forging signatures on federally backed mortgage documents isn't a state matter, Clint. It's federal bank fraud. The LLC structure meant I didn't just hold the deed. I held the mortgage, making me Clint and Dottie's literal creditor. They'd been paying the man they tried to evict. I laid all 3 folders flat on the table. Blue folder says I own this house, I said. Red folder proves you forged my name. Yellow folder shows you owe me $200,000 and the FBI already knows it. Dottie whispered, her voice barely reaching me. You planned this? I documented it, I said. You planned it. I just kept the receipts. Watching it unfold was like watching a Jenga tower come down in slow motion. Each document, another block drawn free. Clint drove both palms into the table. Plates jumped. Wine glasses rattled. Candles lurched. This is a setup, he shouted, neck veins rising, face gone scarlet. You manipulated everything you... Ernie Patton stood up. The movement was unhurried and controlled, but it cut straight through Clint's shouting. Every person in the room turned toward the man who'd been sitting quietly in the corner armchair for the past 2 hours. Ernie Patton. He said, his voice carrying the flat calm of someone accustomed to being the steadiest person in the room. Retired IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I've been coordinating with the FBI's Cleveland field office for 14 days. They hold copies of everything in those 3 folders: audio recordings, witness statements, and full jurisdiction over federal bank fraud cases tied to Fannie Mae-backed mortgages. Ernie Patton wasn't just a friend sitting in a corner. He was a retired federal criminal investigator who'd spent 2 weeks running coordination with the FBI from inside my living room. Clint stared at him the way you stare at something that shouldn't exist. Dot's face had gone white, and Lacey went completely still. She looked at Clint, then at the 3 folders, then at Ernie, then at me. Nobody moved. Then, without a word, Lacey reached down and worked the engagement ring off her left hand. Small, diamond, modest, setting the kind of ring a man with no real income could stretch to afford. She placed it on the table between a plate of oatmeal cookies and the forensic financial analysis that was about to send her fiancé to federal prison. It made a small, soft sound against the wood. Lacey got her coat from the back of her chair, crossed to the front door, and walked out. Her heels struck the hardwood in a clean, even rhythm. The door swung open. Cold December air pushed into the room, carrying pine and the smell of coming snow. The door swung shut. Click, gone, a diamond ring, a federal case, a silent exit. Clint stood staring at the empty doorway. Then he looked down at the ring, then at his mother. Dot's performance had collapsed. The warm smile, the concerned wife, the gracious hostess, all of it stripped away inside of 10 seconds. What remained was a face doing calculations, weighing damage, sorting options, mapping the next move. The real Dottie, the one I'd finally taught myself to see behind those watchful eyes. 23 witnesses, I said quietly. You invited every one of them, Dottie. You built this stage. You just didn't know which play I was going to put on. The room held its silence, broken only by the soft sputtering of candle wax and someone's unsteady breathing. Floyd closed the blue folder with care and set it back on the table. Orvie stood near the kitchen doorway, hand pressed over her mouth. All 23 of them, cousins, neighbors, church friends, sat locked in their chairs, coffee cups arrested halfway to their lips, dessert forks suspended in midair, watching a family come apart on Christmas evening. Lacey's diamond caught the candlelight one last time, resting between the oatmeal cookies and federal fraud documentation. The front door stayed shut. Clint looked at the empty doorway, then the ring, then his mother, whose face had traveled from tears to cold calculation in under 10 seconds. And I thought, this is what truth looks like when it finally stops hiding. The knock came at 8:15 p.m., 3 sharp raps that stopped every conversation mid-word. All 23 people froze. Aunt Noreen's fork hung over her pecan pie. Uncle Floyd shut his laptop on an unfinished email. Clint came out of his chair so fast it scraped the floor. Through the frosted glass panels on either side of my front door, I made out 4 silhouettes, 2 in uniform, 2 in plain clothes behind them. I'll get it, I said. Dot's hand shot across the table. Harlan, wait. It's my house. I walked to the door. I invited them. The lead agent held credentials up to the glass before I turned the deadbolt. Special Agent Curtis Obenhaus, tall, late 30s, wire-rimmed glasses catching the porch light. Behind him, Special Agent Tanya Gill carried a tablet. 2 Zanesville officers flanked the steps. Mr. Crofton. Agent Obenhaus said, "We have a federal warrant for the arrest of Clint Patrick Crofton. Is he present, overseas and no?" "Dining room," I said. "Third from the left." I stepped back. Clint broke for the kitchen. Agent Gill was already moving. She reached the back door before he cleared the hallway. The 2 officers boxed him in from either side. He stopped between the refrigerator and the pantry, hands rising slowly. "Clint Michael Crofton, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked shut at 8:17 p.m. Clint looked back at me over Agent Gill's shoulder, face drained of everything. Dottie was on her feet, one hand against her mouth, the other white-knuckling the table edge. I crossed the dining room and leaned close to Clint's ear as Agent Obenhaus finished the Miranda warning. "You have the right to remain silent," I said. "I'd strongly advise you use it tonight." His eyes went wider. Agent Gill walked him toward the door. "Wait," Dottie lurched forward. "This is a mistake Clint would never Ma'am." Agent Obenhaus's voice stayed even. "Boone Pelham was arrested on December 23rd. He provided a full cooperating statement implicating your son in exchange for a reduced charge recommendation. That statement is what gave us the federal warrant we executed tonight. Fannie Mae assets were illegally targeted to obtain property through forged mortgage documents. Mr. Crofton Jr. withdrew $47,000 in cash from 3 separate accounts between December 20th and 23rd. Flight risk assessment supports immediate detention. The room tilts. How long does it take for a life to come apart? 42 years of marriage, 38 years of parenthood. 96 consecutive mortgage payments, all of it reduced to Miranda rights and federal booking procedures. Agent Gill pauses at the threshold. "Mr. Crofton will need to be available for testimony. Preliminary hearing is set for January 6th. "I'll be there," I say. The door shuts. Through the frosted glass, I watch them put Clint in the back seat. Red and blue lights wash across my Christmas tree. Aunt Noreen starts to cry. Cousin Luann wraps an arm around her. Uncle Floyd comes to stand beside me, hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do," he says quietly. Maybe, but doing the right thing doesn't always feel like righteousness. The next 90 minutes bleed together, guests gathering coats, offering tight-clipped condolences, keeping their eyes off Dottie. By 9:45 p.m., the house has emptied. Floyd is the last one out, stopping on the porch. "Call if you need anything," he says. "Anything at all." I nod, close the door, turn the deadbolt. Dottie is at the dining table in the exact chair where Clint sat 4 hours ago. Lacey's engagement ring still sits between the oatmeal cookies and the fraud documentation. Dottie is staring at it as though it might explain something. How we got here. How Christmas turned into a federal crime scene. How her children chose what they chose. I fill the electric kettle, pull 2 ceramic mugs from the cabinet navy blue with white anchors wedding gifts from 1981. Peppermint tea bags steep while I stand at the counter, watching steam curl upward in the kitchen, quiet. At 10 p.m., I carry both mugs to the table, set one in front of Dottie, take the seat across from her, still warm where Floyd had been sitting. 42 years, 15,300 days. This is what remains. 2 mugs of tea and a small diamond that doesn't belong to either of us. Dottie wraps both hands around her mug, doesn't drink, doesn't look up. "Can you forgive me?" she whispers. I sit with that for a long moment. Think about Orvy's red diary, 14 entries laying out the conspiracy. Think about Cody sleeping upstairs in his Batman sweatshirt while his father rides to federal detention. Think about Lacey walking out the door, her dignity going with her. "No," I say finally, "I can't." Her hands shake. Tea sloshes against ceramic. "But I can offer you a deal," I continue. "Floyd is drafting a co-ownership agreement. You sign, you stay protected. The house stays jointly held. You get a fair equity stake when we sell or when one of us is gone. You won't be homeless. You won't be broke." "And what do you get?" Her voice breaks. "Separate bedrooms," I say. "Separate finances. You're a co-owner and a housemate. Nothing beyond that." We've been married 42 years. I know. I lift my mug. The peppermint tastes like ash. That's the reason you're getting this offer instead of eviction papers. It's more than you extended to me. She finally raises her eyes. Mascara runs in dark lines down her face, framing red-rimmed lids. For a moment, I see the woman I married in 1981, 24 years old, laughing at my terrible dancing, promising forever. But forever ended somewhere between May and December, somewhere between heart attacks and forged signatures, between choosing me and choosing Clint. I'll sign, she says, whatever you want. Good, I stand, rinse my mug in the sink. Floyd will send the documents tomorrow, read them carefully. Bring in your own attorney if you like. I dry my hands. I'm going to bed. Lock up when you're finished. I climb the stairs slowly. My chest aches, not the pain of a heart attack, something that runs deeper. At the landing, I stop outside Cody's room, door cracked open. I can make out his small shape under the dinosaur blankets, one arm thrown wide, breathing slow and even. He doesn't know yet. Doesn't know his father is in federal custody. That his grandmother is complicit. That the family he was born into has fractured past mending. Tomorrow, I'll have to find words for things that don't have clean ones. Tonight, I let him sleep. 2 mugs of peppermint tea cooling in the silent kitchen. 42 years narrowed down to contract terms and separate bedrooms. Dottie's hand trembles as she lifts her mug. I watch the steam rise and think about Cody upstairs, unaware that his father just left in handcuffs. New Year's Day begins not with champagne, but with contract law in a conference room in Columbus. The stretch between Christmas and New Year's dissolves into logistics. Dottie shifts her things to the second-floor guest room. I take the master. We move around each other in the house, like distant planets, close in orbit, never touching. The only words exchanged are about bathroom schedules and the thermostat. The peppermint tea went cold that night. We haven't made more. January 1st comes in cold and clear. At 10 a.m., I'm seated across from Dottie at a mahogany conference table in Nadine Breckner's law office. The attorney is mid-50s, gray-streaked auburn hair, pulled-back reading glasses on her nose. She carries the scent of expensive perfume and leather-bound books. Ernie Patton sits to my right, leather portfolio. Open fountain pen resting on yellow legal paper. Nadine slides 3 stapled documents across the polished surface. The paper whispers against the wood. Outside, snow has started first fall of the new year. 3 options, Mrs. Crofton. Nadine says, co-ownership with restrictions, buyout at appraised value, or civil litigation. Your choice. Dottie's hands rest flat on the table. No wedding ring. She stopped wearing it. December 26th. Her fingers look bare without it. Option 1. Nadine continues tapping the first document. A co-ownership covenant, joint title with equal equity. Neither party may sell, lease, or encumber the property without written consent from the other. Living arrangements stay separate. Costs divided equally. The covenant holds until a mutual sale agreement, the death of either party, or a court order dissolves it. Dottie stares at the page as though it's in a language she can't place. Option 2. Nadine moves to the second document. Mr. Crofton buys out your equity interest at current appraised value $142,000 based on the December assessment. You vacate within 90 days. Clean break. Dottie's jaw tightens. Option 3. Nadine's voice stays level, professional. Civil litigation. You contest the co-ownership claim. We go to court, discovery, depositions, trial. 18 months minimum. Legal fees running $75,000 to $150,000. No guaranteed outcome. The conference room goes quiet. I can hear the heating vent pushing warm air, the muffled noise of traffic 3 floors down, Dottie's shallow breathing. Ernie clicks his pen. Once. Twice. Waiting. Dottie finally looks at me. Her eyes are red-rimmed. She's been crying, though, not where I could see it. Which one do you want me to take? I'm not making that choice for you, I say. That's the whole point. She turns back to the documents. 60 seconds pass, then 90. Nadine sips water from a crystal glass and doesn't hurry her. Option 1, Dottie says at last. The covenant. Nadine draws the document forward and opens to the signature page. You'll each sign here, and initial here. I'll notarize. She passes Dottie a black ballpoint pen. Dottie signs slowly, the handwriting unsteady but readable. Dottie Marie Crofton. 3 places. Her hand trembles on the last initial. Then Nadine slides it to me. I pick up the pen, feel the weight of it, plain plastic, nothing like the pre-printed cursive font Boone Pelham used to steal my signature. This is real ink, a real hand, a real decision. I signed my own name, Harlan James Crofton, deliberate, clear, genuine. No forgery, no fraud, no theft. Just a man taking back what had always belonged to him, his agency, his identity, the right to put his own name on his own life. Nadine notarizes both signatures with a heavy embosser. The seal presses through the paper with a satisfying thunk. Done. We stand, shake hands. Dottie leaves, first stepping out into the January cold without a backward glance. Ernie packs his portfolio and gives my shoulder a single pat. You did the right thing, he says. Maybe. Legal resolution is the opposite of revenge, closer to relief than satisfaction. It doesn't heal anything. It just stops the bleeding. I drive back to Zanesville alone, classic rock turned low, watching snowflakes dissolve against the windshield. By the time I reach Harlan's apartment, it's past noon. I make coffee cheap instant tastes like cardboard and sit at the window looking out over the parking lot. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in late June, Ernie calls while I'm working through the Zanesville paper with my second cup. Sentencing came through, he says, no preamble. Thought you'd want to know. I fold the newspaper and set it aside. Boone Pelham got 8 to 15 combined. Ernie goes on, state forgery charges stacked with federal wire fraud. The judge had no patience for it. Said he exploited a position of trust for personal gain. And Clint, 10 to 20, federal bank fraud, conspiracy, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He has to serve at least 85% before there's any release consideration. The Fannie Mae angle made it worse. They take mortgage fraud seriously. 10 to 20 years. My son will be 58 at the earliest when he walks free. Cody will be 29, an entire childhood gone. Lacey? I ask, though I already know the answer. Clean, Ernie says. No charges. Her name didn't appear anywhere in the documents. No signature trail, no paper connection. She was careful enough to stay out of the record entirely. There it is. Lacey Duvain, who sat at my Christmas table, who played with Cody under the twinkling lights, who seemed woven into all of it. She walks away untouched because she never once put pen to paper. Her careful distance wasn't love or loyalty. It was self-preservation. Harlan, Ernie's voice pulls me back. You still there? Yeah. I watch a crow drop onto the parking lot fence, black feathers against dirty snow. I'm here. And how you holding up? I sit with that question. Justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like a Tuesday morning with cold coffee and gray clouds. It feels like reading sentencing updates alone in a one-bedroom apartment while your son sits in federal detention and your wife rearranges furniture in separate rooms of a house you still share on paper. I'm fine, I say. Thanks for calling. We hang up. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and stare at the gray January sky through the window. The coffee's gone cold. The newspaper sits half read. The radiator clanks and hisses, wrestling with winter. Somewhere, Clint sits in a federal holding facility, waiting to be transferred to whatever prison will hold him for the next decade. Somewhere, Dottie moves through rooms we used to occupy, together a ghost of a marriage drifting through familiar hallways. Somewhere, Lacey goes about her unblemished life, free and untouchable. And somewhere, a 9-year-old boy waits for the clarity I promised him under Christmas lights. That promise is the only debt still outstanding. I pay it on January 15th. The one to Cody will take longer. Orvy's front porch catches the afternoon sun, winter light angling through bare branches and throwing shadow patterns across the weathered wood. She'd set out 2 mugs of peppermint tea and a plate of oatmeal cookies. Steam rose from the mugs in the cold air condensation, beating against ceramic. She slid a red diary across the table toward me, its cover worn from 42 years of bearing witness. I thought you might want this back, she said. I rested a hand on the leather cover. 14 entries, June through October. Every conversation, every suspicion, every moment Dottie confided in her oldest friend while plotting to strip her husband of what was his. Keep it, I said. Evidence belongs with the court. I don't need reminders. Neither do I. Orvy wrapped both hands around her mug. She's 64, but she looked older that afternoon. Lines cut deeper around her eyes, shoulders drawn inward. She came by yesterday. Dottie. I waited. Asked if we could move past this. Her voice carried the phrase as though it were wrapped in barbed wire. Said she'd made mistakes, but that family is family, and neighbors ought to support each other. What did you tell her? I told her I know the difference between wanting to heal and wanting an alibi. Orvie held my gaze. She'll figure out which one she actually needs. There it is. 40 years of friendship reduced to one sentence of devastating clarity. Orvie didn't just deliver evidence, she chose truth over ease, justice over loyalty, a neighbor's dignity over a friend's comfort. I lifted my tea. It tasted like honey and regret. You sacrificed a lot for me. I traded a comfortable lie for an uncomfortable truth, she said. That's different. We sat in silence for a while. A mourning dove called from the oak tree, then lifted off and was gone. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Ordinary neighborhood sounds, the kind I'd stopped registering, somewhere between May and December. She asked me once, Orvie said quietly. Back in July. Asked how I could stand living next door to you. Said you were difficult, controlling, that you monitored her spending, questioned her decisions, made her feel small. Orvie shook her head. I told her I'd lived next door for 16 years and never once met the man she was describing. I knew someone who shoveled my driveway without being asked, who came out at midnight to fix my porch light when it shorted, who showed up with soup when I had pneumonia. My throat tightened. I asked her how she could spend 42 years with you and not see what the whole neighborhood saw plainly. Orvie looked at her mug. She didn't have an answer. The tea cooled between us. The oatmeal cookies sat untouched. The winter sun dropped lower, spreading gold and amber across the porch. How do you thank someone who burned a 4-decade friendship to hand you a red leather diary? What words settle that account? Thank you, I said finally. Inadequate, insufficient, true. Orvie nodded. You going to be okay, Harlan? Eventually, I said. I'm picking up Cody this Saturday, going to rebuild that toy truck alternator with him. Explain things as best I can. That boy's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. I left the diary on her porch table. She could burn it, keep it, or bury it in the garden. The words inside had already done their work. Truth doesn't need a leather cover anymore. January 20th arrives quiet and cold. I'm up at 6 a.m. Old habit unchanged. The apartment is small, 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely wide enough for a table and 2 chairs, but it's mine. Funded by pension and Social Security, not joint accounts or co-ownership arrangements. I make real coffee this time, medium roast bought on sale at the grocery store. Nothing extravagant. It smells the way a morning ought to. Warm, bitter, uncomplicated. I stand at the kitchen window, watching the streets of Zanesville stir to life under gray clouds. No bank statements to audit. No mortgage auto pay to verify. No hidden accounts to track down. No forged documents to fear. No conspiracy left to unravel. Just coffee, just January, light through clean windows, just the refrigerator's low hum and distant traffic on 12th Street. My phone sits on the counter without a sound. No attorneys, no accountants, no FBI. The last message is from Dottie 3 days back. Furnace repair, scheduled Tuesday 2 p.m. if you want to be present. I didn't reply. The co-ownership agreement obligates her to notify me of major repairs. It doesn't obligate conversation. I sip my coffee. Better than the instant. Not great, but better. Good enough. Peace isn't a trumpet blast. It's morning light on clean windows. It's coffee you chose yourself. It's a phone that sits quiet for longer than 90 minutes. I turn the last 8 months over in my mind. May's heart attack, June's refinancing discovery. July's detective work, August through November, building the case, piece by piece. December's confrontation, and the arrests, January's legal resolution. 245 days from catastrophe to covenant, from forgery to federal sentencing, from married man to separate bedroom co-owner to independent apartment tenant, and at the end of it all, one promise still waiting. Saturday at 10 o'clock, Cody coming over. We'll sit at this small kitchen table with the toy truck alternator laid out between us, wires, gears, plastic housing, and I'll explain what happened to his father. I'll use simple words for large betrayals. I'll answer whatever questions he's brave enough to put to me. I'll rebuild his trust the same way we'll rebuild that alternator, one piece at a time, checking every connection, making sure things fit right before we move ahead. The coffee goes lukewarm in my hands. Outside, Zanesville wakes up slowly, headlights carving through gray dawn, exhaust rising from cold engines, a garbage truck grinding down the block. An ordinary Tuesday morning. An ordinary life. Turns out peace sounds like nothing in particular. I rinse my mug, check the calendar on the refrigerator. January 20th circled in blue ink. Saturday the 25th marked in my own hand. Cody 10 a.m. 5 days. 120 hours. 7,200 minutes until I keep my word. I stand at the window mug, warm in my hands, watching the city come awake under gray January clouds. Saturday at 10, a 9-year-old with questions a toy alternator waiting to be put back together. The only numbers that matter anymore are the hours until I honor that promise. Some conversations can't wait for better weather. I sign my grandson's future in black ink on a Tuesday afternoon, while winter light angles through the window of Ernie's office. Saturday's coming, but not before this. Not before securing what counts most. Ernie's office carries the scent of old leather and coffee grounds. The trust documents spread across his mahogany desk catch the afternoon sun, 23 pages of legal language that reduce down to a single promise. Cody Crofton will have an education no one can take from him. $80,000, Ernie says, touching the signature line with his fountain pen. Untouchable. Set aside for education only. Nobody can touch it but Cody when he turns 18. Not Clint, not Dottie, not creditors' lawsuits or family emergencies. $80,000 liquidated from accounts tied to the fraud prosecution. Money that was supposed to finance my removal, now financing my grandson's future instead. I pick up the pen. It's heavy real metal, not cheap plastic. The kind of pen that understands what it's being asked to sign. The Cody Crofton Educational Trust. I read it aloud. The words taste like redemption. I sign clear, deliberate, unhurried. My own hand, my own name, my own choice. Ernie witnesses it, adds his signature beneath mine, and presses the notary seal into the paper with a firm mechanical thunk. He'll never fully know what it took to protect this, I say quietly. Ernie sets down his pen and takes off his reading glasses. At 71, he looks tired but solid the way old oak looks after a long winter. Maybe that's the whole point, he says. We shake hands. Then he pulls me into a brief embrace. Two old men in a law office on a Tuesday afternoon. One who built the case, one who had the nerve to use it. You did good, Harlan, he says, not just with the case, with all of it. I drive home with the trust documents tucked in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. Legal armor for a 9-year-old who still operates on the assumption that the grown-ups around him tell the truth. Maybe he'll hold on to that a little longer now. Saturday morning comes, in cold and clear. Cody sits at my kitchen table, small hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. I make scrambled eggs, butter, salt, pepper, nothing elaborate. Toast comes up golden. He's wearing his Batman sweatshirt, the one with the small hole in the left sleeve, that he won't let anyone fix. We eat without needing to fill the quiet. Cody swings his legs under the chair. Feet still don't reach the floor. Outside, Zanesville eases into the gray January morning. He glances up from his plate, brown eyes steady and serious under dark bangs. Grandpa, are you happy? The same question he put to me in the tool shed under the Christmas lights. This time, I don't perform the answer. No buying his silence with false certainty, no manufactured reassurance. I smile and mean it. I'm happy, kiddo, I say. My coffee's still hot. He grins gaps where baby teeth used to be, adult teeth pushing in, crooked. That's a weird way to say you're happy. Maybe, I admit, but it's true. He reaches for another piece of toast. That's where Harlan's story lands. Not with a shout, not with a scene. With a 9-year-old boy swinging his feet under a kitchen chair, asking his grandfather if he's happy, and meaning it. I've thought about what this story cost him 42 years of a life. He thought he understood a son he raised with his own hands, a marriage that turned out to have a second set of books running behind the scenes. What it taught him is harder to name. I believe God has a way of placing the right people beside us at exactly the right moment. Ernie with his legal mind, Orvie with her red diary, Floyd with his auditor's eyes. None of that was coincidence. The truth found its witnesses because Harlan was patient enough to let it. If these father stories have shown me anything, it's that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the most dangerous to underestimate. Harlan's story, what some might call a dad's revenge, though he never called it that himself, wasn't built on anger. It was built on documentation, patience, and the refusal to sign his name to something that wasn't true. Here is what I'd want someone I love to take from this. Document everything. A date, a conversation, a signature written down is worth more than remembered. If someone is rushing you to sign, slow down. The urgency is theirs, not yours. Protect the next generation first. An $80,000 trust for a grandchild is worth more than any act of revenge. And never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is the strategy. If this story moved, you leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, a parent, a friend, anyone who's ever been told they're past the point of fighting back. And if you haven't subscribed to His Hidden Revenge, yet now is the time. There are more stories waiting. Thank you for being here with me today. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.